Now let's talk a little bit about what today we are doing and spending most of our time. It's basically about creating visibility, discovery, classification, beautiful dashboards, and kind of a false perception of security. Even after data has left, has been exfiltrated, has been breached, we are kind of still reliant on this beautiful dashboard and inventory of that data, and was able to check that compliance box. Now, why I call it point-in-time exercise is obviously when data is at rest, you're taking a snapshot of it. And in an industry where 80% of our data is unstructured, there's no set schema or there's no set structure of what kind of data is. And think about SharePoint, Google Drive, object storage. So in my last company, when we started to scan S3 buckets for one of the business units, they said they have 3,000 S3 buckets. And on one side, I was thinking, holy cow, I gotta scan 3,000 S3 buckets because I don't know what I'm gonna be finding and how many DSPM licenses I'll actually consume for that. But then the other thing was that once I'm done, scanning those 3,000 buckets, 200 more buckets have already been created. And all of those 3,000 buckets that I inventoried, 50 or 100 more files have been added to them as well. So my inventory exercise is already stale at that point of time. So that's why it's like a point in time. The other aspect is about data at rest, because the discovery and classification doesn't follow the data as it moves out of that system. And this is something that, I don't know how many times it needs to be echoed, that data discovery and classification is not data protection. Even though there's a lot of misconceived notion about these products being sold as data protection, but at the end of the day, they're not. One of the fallacies and probably one of the biggest lies that we are living through, and as an approach, which I think is practically wrong, is this: that we need to discover and classify sensitive data before we can protect it. Right? So it's not only just an obsolete approach to take, but I think it's just plain wrong. Right? Because forget about how much time it takes for us to scan and discover and classify across thousands of data stores. And if you're successfully being able to do that with infinite amount of resources and licensing, the attackers are not waiting for you to get done, right? So we gotta take more of a burn the candle from both ends approach, right? I mean, there are certain benefits of inventorying your data, from a data governance perspective. You need to ensure that whatever you're storing, whether you're supposed to store, when was the last time that data was used, if there is a data minimization element to that. So of course, before even DSPMs or data discovery and classification was a thing, as a practice, Fortune 500, Fortune 100 companies, they've protected data. It was not something that, I gotta figure out what I have and then only then go into production mode. So one of the CEOs of a prevalent DSPM companies, one of the statement made was that, we enable CISOs and enterprise cybersecurity leaders to articulate what data has been breached. Because, we have inventoried it. And then I'm scratching my head. I was like, the whole idea was not to get breached, right? So it's kind of more of a reporting and auditing exercise. So I think when we talk about data inventory, it's good to understand that what does it apply to, right? And then I'll probably quote a very special moment in history from a very important gentleman who's using this phrase in an entirely different context, that there are known knowns, there are known unknowns, and there are unknown unknowns. So when it comes to the known knowns, that means where the data is, what those data stores are, and you have a very fairly good idea that what is in those data stores. Because other than that, you won't be able to have your application work. Your business won't survive, because if you didn't know what data you're collecting, processing, and storing. Then you have the known unknowns, which typically applies to the unstructured data stores like, this Google Drive, SharePoint, and you're just dumping a bunch of files and you just don't have an idea what type of data is being there. So that is kind of like the known unknowns. And the unknown unknowns part is that you have no idea where my data is and what type of data it is, right? So when it comes to the discovery and classification, there's practically no point wasting time and effort in the known knowns, right? Because you know exactly what you have. And the unknown unknowns, obviously, if you cannot point to your scanners, to discover and classify because you don't know where they exist, it doesn't even apply, from a discovery and classification standpoint. So basically where you're focusing is the known unknowns, which is basically 1/3 of the entire data landscape. And that itself is a very big effort, because there's a lot of those happening. As I said, 80% of the data is unstructured. Now, here we have an issue with that. Provided, let's assume that we are able to capture the known unknowns and we were able to discover and classify everything. We get insights, but there's this big chasm between insights and action. And that is where the biggest pain point lies. There's too much visibility, too much surfacing and reporting of metadata, but there's no way for us to take immediate action on that. And because now we are figuring out where my highest risks are, what do I prioritize, what security controls I need to put in place, and then go into action. It just takes years. And even the data discovery classification vendors, DSPMs, you could see that they're essentially finding this, that we can't really stop at discovering data because there has to be some sort of a protection mechanism. So you see some of the latest acquisitions where DSPM companies buying DLP companies for that, right? So you can say that, yeah, there is this whole aspect of that. Just discovering classification, just insights is not really going to be reducing any of that risk. But the issue with these, one company buying the other, is it's kind of like still fragmented tools, right? They don't integrate with each other, and they have their own little things that they've been doing. It's just kind of like, hey, let's put these Frankenstein together, try to make it look like a platform. So when we talk about the DLPs and the CASBs with embedded DLPs in place, obviously they're not only constrained to very specific use cases, user endpoint, internet traffic, SaaS traffic, just monitoring if there's anything sensitive. But the actions that they typically take is alerting or blocking, right? Or quarantining sometimes. In the blocking and quarantining mode, obviously you're disrupting the business operations. In most of the cases, you won't be able to actually have the business sign off on blocking traffic. So at the end of the day, you're generating a lot of alerts and triaging those alerts, burning the midnight oil to find, okay, how I sort through the false positives and look at some of the stuff. But at the end of the day, you're still chasing, right? Because the thing has already happened and you've been alerted on it. And they're not in the business of sanitizing the data, right? And the data will flow, but there's no desensitization happening.